Every group of people on the political spectrum has what I like to call stock arguments, stock phrases that they use in, your typical Twitter argument. I define stock argument and or phrase as a, phrase and argument that a certain group of people have memorized so that they can whip it out whenever a different group uses, a specific argument or phrase. I feel like I'm being convoluted when explaining this. So for example, a stock phrase pro-lifers might use is, "We need to protect unborn babies from people that murder babies." And then a pro-choice person might say back to that with a stock argument of, you certainly do care more about unborn babies than you do the born babies, don't you? Those are what I consider stock phrases and stock arguments, things that we've seen from certain political groups, specific or non-specific, over and over and over again. Stock phrases and arguments aren't necessarily good or bad. Like, I'm not gonna say stock phrase bad. It really depends upon the situation. Sometimes they are good arguments. Sometimes they're overused and they subsequently lose all meaning. I'm finding that a bit more often than I would like. Sometimes people take it too far and use their stock arguments without any nuance whatsoever. And sometimes stock arguments and or phrases just suck. And that's across the political spectrum. I'm not pointing out any one particular group of people when I describe this, because every single one of you are guilty of this. Now, to get to the point, back when Dave Chappelle was being rightfully roasted for being a flaming transphobe, people were bringing in the stock arguments, the usual shenanigans that we see when a comedian is being transphobic. On one side, the stock argument was, it's just a joke, which I disagree with and could write a very long essay on why that's not appropriate in this context. On the other side, however, I noticed that the stock arguments you guys were using were dog shit. Terrible arguments. You're like asking to get steamrolled on Twitter when you use these. Sometimes you guys have good intentions, but you don't voice them well. I'm guilty of that as well. It does seem like there was a very large group of people that had good intentions with their stock arguments here, but these particular stock arguments had zero analysis. The arguments you're using are simply not good. The two main ones I saw were, if it's a joke, then why isn't it funny? And then the second one was, if it offends people, it's not a funny joke. I understand Twitter is not really a place for nuance, but you're gonna get steamrolled with these arguments, dude. They are so easily rebutted. And I simply don't entirely agree with them as a whole. For that first argument, the weaknesses of the statement are very obvious. They are right when they say humor is subjective. That is true. All moral implications aside, just because you don't find something funny doesn't mean somebody else does. Might it make them an asshole to find it funny? Certainly. But it still overrides your argument. And not only will this argument set you up for failure every time, it's also sort of giving the other side ammo as well. In fact, I have seen the old switcheroo with these stock arguments sometimes. For instance, if you want to make a joke about burning the US flag, the conservatives are going to come at you and be like, well, if it was a joke, why wasn't it funny? And it's kind of like, at that point, I can't even feel bad for you for getting that in your comments, because you kind of set yourself up. And it doesn't work for either groups for any groups of people, by the way. It's not going to work every time. It's just a bad zero analysis argument. The second one doesn't work because, once again, I guess it does come back to the fact that humor is subjective. Whether or not something offends people is not why we should be caring about certain things like the Dave Chappelle situation. There are 7.7 billion people in the world, and different people get offended by different things, and even within their own, marginalized group, they disagree on what is offensive and what is not. Quite frankly, I cannot give a shit about 7.7 billion different people's individual emotions. I can't. That is not humanly possible. If we decide that jokes are okay or not based upon the premise of being offended, we wouldn't be able to say anything because somebody would get offended across the political spectrum no matter what you say. That is the truth. Everybody is different, and neither I nor you can, censor ourselves to a level where nobody gets upset. That's not possible. So how do we judge when jokes are okay? I personally like to care about real life. I like to close the computer and look outside sometimes. I judge a joke by its real life consequences. I don't, necessarily care about someone's feelings. It's not my top priority. It's not necessarily not a priority at all, but it's definitely not my first priority. I care about the real life consequences. Is somebody going to die? Is this attributing to someone's death? Is this going to attribute to homelessness? Is this going to attribute to resource access? Is this going to kill people? That's what I care about, because that is a real life consequence. Quite frankly, I don't care if you think the word hyper is a slur. That's just fucking stupid. And it's not going to change the material reality of this marginalized group you speak of. You're just pissing and shitting on Twitter. So, with all that being said, I'm going to exemplify what I mean by watching a try not to laugh TikTok edition challenge, but instead of laughing, I'm just going to respond to each and every one of them with a completely just diluted Twitter brain argument, and then after I come up with that diluted Twitter brain argument to get offended, I will say afterwards whether or not I've actually seen it in the wild being Twitter and or screenshots of TikTok comments. That's not funny. Thousands of young boys are traumatized by spontaneous erections every year. It's no laughing matter. I haven't seen that one, but by golly, I'm sure it's been said.
Goofy on phone. What the fuck?
What if that were a real mouse? You're just gonna let it spin until it dies? You like animal abuse? I haven't seen it be said about a fake mouse, but I'm sure that there have been people pissing and shitting over a real mouse for sure. Actually, I have seen people pissing and shitting about real mice. Absolutely, absolutely.
Not my son. She says
You think animals fighting and hurting each other is funny? Animals are hurt, and all you can do is laugh. I've absolutely seen this one hundreds, if not thousands of times by now.
Something you eat often but never post.
Really? Someone says eat and all you can do is objectify women? I've absolutely seen this one hundreds of times. You think putting people in danger is funny? They could have died. I see it all the fucking time. Whether the person on the receiving end of the danger deserves it or not. I see it all the time.
Sisters, James Charles here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm gonna eat my own ass on camera.
There's so many things wrong with this. Making fun of James Charles is homophobic, but also making a joke about James Charles is supporting pedophilia, but also your dad putting a camera in your room is pedophilia, but also you eating your own ass in front of that camera, like you said you would, is pedophilia, but also your dad's abusive. I actually believe that last part. I actually do believe that it is abuse to put cameras in your child's room. That is fucking disgusting. All that other shit, I'm 100% sure I've seen at least one of them get said before. I've definitely seen people say that making fun of James Charles is homophobic. It's not. He's a pedophile. Allegedly. Child abuse isn't funny. I do actually believe that this is definitely child abuse, but I also think that he has every right to make a joke about it if he's the one dealing with it and going through that experience. So not something that I would get offended and say you can't joke about. The fetishization of goth girls has gone too far. Also, loneliness in men is not a joke. I've definitely seen people, to be fair, I kind of agree. I've definitely seen people say that, like, the fetishization of goth women is going to become a problem. Anyways, I find the joke about him not having a girlfriend completely harmless.
She's alright. Ain't all that. I ain't too.
Why? Why can't you like the TikTok? You have a superiority complex? Are you a narcissist? I don't know if I've seen this one before. I probably haven't seen that complaint before, but I'm sure it's out there.
Oh no, this can't be.
That's not funny. We just went through a pandemic. You're waking up with a sore throat and you're not immediately taking a COVID test? It's not something to joke about. People died. I've probably seen that before. I don't know for certain, however. Suicide jokes are not funny. It's a very serious thing. Also, stop objectifying Dua Lipa. I've absolutely seen both of these several hundred times. Delusions and hallucinations are not funny. People with schizophrenia have to deal with that every day. I've seen some things along the lines of that, at least taken out of context, much like in the way that I just did jokingly. I think you guys get the point now. It's extremely easy to get offended by everything, and quite frankly, I don't give a shit. I'm gonna care about whether or not that has actual, like, real life consequences before I'm going to piss and shit myself, because we can't just judge by who gets offended, because somebody's going to get offended. There's, once again, 7.7 billion people, so we have to take that into account, and sometimes you don't have to care. Do some analysis, figure out if that's going to harm a marginalized group, and then decide from there.